Now, chances are, if you're a parent with children of school age, you got a letter from their head teacher last week. It's part of the Worthless campaign that heads around the country have been waging to draw attention to what they argue are serious funding shortfalls in our schools. Teachers from one primary school in Southampton protesting this week over funding problems, which they say means they can't pay for the basics.
I'm getting a little bit sick and tired of having to put all of my wages into buying resources for my classroom, from pens and pencils, paper, laminating pouches.
Just one school, many others would recognise the problems. And yet at PMQs, the Prime Minister was insisting school funding is at record levels.
I recognise that we have been asking schools to do more. We've responded with 1.3 billion extra investment going to our schools across this year and next. So the core schools budget will be rising by around 2.6 billion in total. And overall per pupil funding is being protected in real terms by this government. Every school is attracting at least 1% more per pupil by next year, and thousands of schools will attract significantly larger gains of up to 3% per pupil per year.
In the spring statement that followed, just minutes later, the Chancellor made no mention of any extra funds to address head teachers' concerns. Joining me now, Jules White, head teacher at Tandridge House School in West Sussex, and you're the person who's been coordinating this Worthless campaign. We've spoken to you about it before. Yes. Are you having an impact? Is it making any difference?
I think there's been some impact. I mean, I think, first of all, politicians across the political divide are beginning to accept that the points that we've been making, they know that budgets have been incredibly tight and that we've lost in real terms. I think the government does need to be given some credit. They've introduced a new national funding formula. They've made some pay grant awards and some contributions to pensions, but it's still nowhere near enough.
But there is a lot of money going in. We
always hear about the money going in to schools, and of course one of the contentions that head teachers have is that you can't just assume that money going to school if you don't look at the costs as well, and the costs have been absolutely significant, and all the independent evidence says that there's been an 8% real terms reduction in school funding since 2010, and that's because of things like contributions to pensions, pay, a loss of grants, apprenticeship levy. I could go on and on, but all in all, our budgets have been reduced in real terms.
Sending letters home, is it the right thing to do? I mean, parents are going to be swayed by an individual head teacher at the school their children go to. Nobody's going to turn around to you and say, well, hang on a minute, no, I don't want to do this.
Well, I think to start with, we've lobbied MPs behind the scenes and we've lobbied the DFE privately, and we've made our points, but we weren't getting the type of movement that we needed, and we're part and parcel of our community. I feel very strongly about the community that I work in, as do head teachers up and down the country, and we felt that we had a duty to tell parents the truth. Nobody's ever said that we've been factually incorrect. We've simply not overstated things. Our campaign motto is to be relentlessly reasonable. We're doing that all the time,
yes.
But we are seeing really significant things. The things that get mentioned often now are pens, paper, toilet roll and so on. Of course, those things are important, but there are really significant cuts going on within our school. Class sizes are rising.
You could do something about it. You could have bigger class sizes, couldn't you, and fewer teachers, and then pay for the pens and the toilet roll.
I think once you get above 30 and 35, if you've ever tried teaching GCSE mathematics with 30, 15 and 16-year-olds, very, very telling exams. I think that you want to have the best. I think parents don't want to see class sizes rising. They also want the type of services around their child, the support services, the social care, the pastoral care, and more schools are at the front line of that. We've seen significant cuts elsewhere, and that is having a significant impact. We wrote this time that the children that are often bearing the brunt of these cuts are often the most vulnerable. In my school, I'm having to use what's called the pupil premium funding. That's funding that's designated for disadvantaged children and families. I'm having to use it to prop up my core budget. We're also seeing, I think all politicians recognise the problems around SEND and high needs funding. We are all so concerned about that. Just because a youngster's education may be a little bit more expensive because they need more one-to-one support, they need more involvement from other adults, other support services, it doesn't mean that we shouldn't deliver. And that's what we as head teachers are doing within our community. And parents are absolutely right behind us. All the time, parents are saying, thank you very much. We're not doing it in an exaggerated way. We're not being overblown, but we are very, very concerned.
You only get one chance at education, and surely if you're not investing in these children, you're losing out. Society is losing out generally. Royston.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree with much of what has been said. I was at a debate last week about school funding, and one of the things I said is, now I know being reasonable is the right approach in my opinion, but not everyone is, and not everyone has been, certainly not with me. And the point that I try to make is that if we can acknowledge, and you have, and I pay tribute to for doing that, acknowledge that there is more in schools than ever before, that there's more money than there was before.
But it's not enough.
But it's not enough.
And money's actually being taken away from those
They
pupils.
were the very words that I used
effect.
in the debate. And I made that point straight to the Minister.
Yes.
And it's not lost. But what I did say there as well is about the reasonableness. I think that is really, really key. So if you take some of my colleagues, Tim Lawton's a great example, who's lobbied behind the scenes relentlessly. Part of the 1.3 billion uplift was for people like him that did precisely what head teachers were asking them to do, to lobby ministers directly. What happens too often, because we know about pensions and we know about SEND and we know about the pressures that schools are facing, but what happens too often is the type of debate, and certainly in Southampton it's been with me, pushes people into a corner where they defend their position rather than trying to acknowledge what the problems are and trying to sort them out. But otherwise, those challenges that schools are facing, I absolutely acknowledge, and I absolutely think that they need more money for schools. I've made that position really clear.
It is an austerity thing in the end, though, isn't it? It is the government trying to save money overall.
The problem is, though, that if you cut back on education, then in subsequent years, you'll see the impact because we won't have the skilled population that we need. We'll have many other problems arising because children haven't received that excellent education that everyone has a right to. And I have to say, one of the things I thought it was very important to do was to talk to teachers and particularly get head teachers' take on what was going on in my constituency. So I surveyed them, and the majority of them said they've had to cut back on teachers, teaching assistants, looking at other ways of saving money, had to cut back on that provision for special educational needs. And, you know, this is at a time, exactly as was just mentioned, where schools are expected to do much more than they used to be expected to. Now they're going to be expected to help with mental health and many, many different functions they're having to deal with. Unfortunately, a real surge in crime amongst young people, secondary schools. They're trying to deal with that, but with their costs going up and the funding not rising to keep pace with that. And this is a false economy, because in the long run it'll cost us.
Is it a generation that have come through with austerity now who have lost out? And are we reaping the consequences now? Knife crime, for example.
Yeah, I think one has to be careful about headline issues like knife crime, but I do think that we are not giving the type of service that we would want. There are knock-on effects. We like it, whether we like it or not, there's a real concern about a teacher shortage now. That's probably because teachers are overworked and they're being asked to do lots and lots of additional things. We know that social mobility is not where it wants to be. That's what's brought myself and many others into the profession. We want to see youngsters doing that. I think there needs to be a change of debate. I think that what we need from Damien Hinds as Secretary of State is going to the Treasury and talking about schools and school funding as an investment for the future. We all need that. We've just been talking about Brexit. Boy, oh boy, do we need an investment in our children.
There is supposedly a war chest building up, and you've put yourself at the top of the queue.
We hope so.
Thank you.